Hello YouTube! Well, in this video I'm going to take a look at Arthur Schopenhauer's defense of philosophical pessimism. I think it would be fair to say that Schopenhauer develops one of the most striking expressions of pessimism in Western philosophy, and that's what this video is going to be about. Before we begin though, just a quick advert. If you like my channel, you can support me on Patreon or with a donation on PayPal. I offer private tutoring, please email if you're interested. And if you want to talk about any of these topics, join the Discord, a link will be in the description. Okay, so Schopenhauer's pessimism flows from his metaphysics. So we will begin by outlining the relevant parts of Schopenhauer's metaphysical views. Okay, so Schopenhauer draws from Kant a distinction between what Kant called the phenomena and the noumena, distinction between the world as it appears to us and the world as it is in itself. So the phenomenal world is the world as it is presented in perception and thought. It's the world we interact with in everyday life. It's the world that's studied by empirical science. When I pick up an apple, it appears as a particular color, it has a particular taste and texture. These are the phenomenal appearances of the apple. Obviously the apple will appear in different ways to different creatures. When a dog looks at an apple, it doesn't see, the colors don't appear the same way because the dog's visual system is different. So like when we see an apple, okay, that consists of a particular set of phenomenal appearances. Now, then there is what Kant called the noumena, the noumenal world, and this is the world as it exists independently of us, independent of perception and thought. This is the world as it is in itself, the thing in itself. Now, as far as Kant is concerned, we have access only to the phenomena. We cannot know anything about the noumena, about the thing in itself. Schopenhauer, by contrast, says, actually, we can know the nature of the world as it is in itself, and we'll get to that in a second. So Schopenhauer's most famous book is his book The World as Will and Representation, and this actually nicely summarizes his metaphysical system. So according to Schopenhauer, the world has this kind of double aspect. So begin with the phenomenal world, the world as it appears to us, the world of objects and parts and causes, of space and time. This is representation. This is my representation. So when I pick up an apple, it's not quite right to say that I just, see the apple or just know the apple as it is in itself. Rather, I know the appearances of the apple. I know the way that the apple manifests to me. But none of that is, that's not mind independent, right? The appearance of the apple is dependent on my perceptual and cognitive systems. So, as Schopenhauer puts it, and I quote, "Everything that in any way belongs and can belong to the world is inevitably associated with this being conditioned by the subject and exists only for the subject. The world is representation." So this is the world as representation. Now, Schopenhauer, so the world has this represented aspect, but as in Kant, it also has a non-represented aspect. This is the world as it is in itself, independent of perception and thought. The thing in itself exists beyond the mind. It will be represented differently by different minds. There can be many representations of a single reality. Now, according to Schopenhauer, the thing in itself is not going to be something that is differentiated into objects or parts. It's not going to be differentiated into different moments. It doesn't exist in space and time and so on, because objects, parts, space and time, these are all aspects of representation. So clearly we can't know the thing in itself through any kind of empirical study or examination of appearances, but Schopenhauer does not think that the thing in itself is totally hidden to us. And the key point for Schopenhauer is that since I am already part of reality, then in a sense the thing in itself is just revealed in my own experience. Like I am directly acquainted with it just in my own experience because I am it, right? Like I already am the thing in itself. So, again, like on Kant's view, we have access only to the phenomena. We can't know anything about the noumena. But Schopenhauer says, well, we are like I am the noumena, right? So actually, I can know it that way. So consider, for instance, your own body, right? So I think about my own body. My own body is known to me in two different ways, or it's like revealed to me in two different ways. On the one hand, it's a physical object that is experienced through sensations, through vision, touch, smell, whatever. It's experienced in space and time. It interacts with other physical objects. This is a kind of external knowledge of my body. It's the way my body appears in sense perception. But I also have an internal subjective awareness of my body. I don't just like observe my bodily states. I like direct them, and I intentionally move my body around. I have this subjective experience of willing my body to do various things. So like, okay, so this is a kind of double aspect to my body, right? So I have the appearances of my body in my sense perception, but then I also have this experience of like actively moving my body, willing my body to do things. And I can notice that this will is what drives all of my actions. I mean, it's what underlies every decision, every project, everything I do in my life. There's this sense of willing, of pushing my body to do things. And this comes about because there's various things about the world that I want to change, or maybe there's things about the world that I want to kind of maintain them in the face of them potentially being taken from me. So there are various ways in which the world differs from how I want it to be, or at least it threatens to change from how I want it to be. And and so I kind of have this. There's this like desire, this sense of striving, this need to remedy a deficiency. This is will. All specific desires are an expression of will. So the picture we have here then is that I'm conscious of my body in two different ways. I'm conscious of it as representation and as will. There's this double aspect to the body. There's the way the body is represented in thought and sense experience. It has particular colours, textures, feelings, etc. And then there's this internal experience of willing, of directing the movements of the body. So it's experienced as representation and as will. The representation is the external knowledge, the will is the internal knowledge or the internal experience. So consider some specific act of willing, right? Let's take a desire to drink water. I take this example from Dale Jacquet's article on Schopenhauer in the Central Works of Philosophy. So let's take this desire to drink water. I can ask myself the question, why do I will to drink water? Well, there are many reasons I might have. There are many motivations, right? So, I mean, usually the reason is because I'm thirsty and I want to quench my thirst, right? So, why do I will to drink water? Well, to quench my thirst. But again, I can ask, why do I will to quench my thirst? Well, maybe because thirst is an unpleasant physical sensation. But then, of course, that raises the question, well, why do I will to be free from unpleasant physical sensations? In asking these questions, I'm asking about the world as representation. I'm asking for sort of motivations and causes, and I'm thinking about specific objects and so on. And of course, I could continue asking these sorts of questions indefinitely, but this line of inquiry kind of raises a slightly different question, which is, why do I will at all? Why do I will anything? Now, when I ask the question, why do I will X? Like, why do I will some specific thing? I can always give some motivation for that specific act of will. There's going to be a particular object that I desire for particular reasons. But now I'm asking, why do I will anything at all? And to this, Schopenhauer claims, there really just is no answer. I just do will, and that's that. And in fact, so I can't really cite any particular motivation for why I will in general, because a motivation would imply a further act of will, right? So there is no particular motivation for like why I will anything at all. And the reason why this question of why I will anything at all, the reason why this is illegitimate, Schopenhauer claims, is that I just am will. I am identical with will. And here we're not talking about any particular act of willing, but just a kind of pure will, a pure urging or striving, blind and undirected. So the picture we have then is that we have the body revealed in two different ways, right? There's the body as it's represented in sensory experience. There's the way it looks to vision. There's the way it feels when we touch it. But then, right, my body is also, I have this internal experience of willing, and Schopenhauer thinks that will is in a sense my essence. This is what the body is in itself. This is what I am in itself. The thing in itself, in my case, is will. Okay, so what about the rest of the world? Well, just like my body, I know it as representation. I have perceptual experiences of other objects in the world. But now, since I am part of the world, my inner knowledge or my inner experience of my own body can tell me the nature of the thing in itself beyond representation. So as Schopenhauer says, we are ourselves are the thing in itself. Consequently, away from within stands open to us. Away from within stands open to us to that real inner nature of things to which we cannot penetrate from without. The thing in itself can come into consciousness quite directly, namely by it itself being conscious of itself. I come to have knowledge of the thing in itself, the way the world is beyond representation, because I am the thing in itself. And we've just seen that the thing in itself is will. So I can see in my own case that I experience these episodes of willing, that I'm like that's my internal experience of my body. My will to drink water moves my body to take the water. Now, if you sort of strip away the representation, right, strip away specific appearances of water, strip away specific spatio-temporal locations of objects, strip away the phenomenal appearances, what's left is pure willing, pure striving. It's this pure willing that Schopenhauer identifies as the thing in itself. So, thing in itself is will. It's not going to be, to be clear, it's not going to be any specific acts of will, right? A specific act of will only takes place in the world as representation. So, like, my desire for a drink of water, that's a specific act of will. The thing in itself, it's not like, it doesn't desire specific things. It's just pure will. It's totally undifferentiated striving. So this is the kind of double aspect of the world. There is the world as will, the world as it is in itself, this pure undifferentiated striving, and then there's the world as representation, the world of appearances. These are one and the same thing. So compare, for instance, how like thunder and lightning are one and the same thing perceived from different perspectives. It's kind of a similar thing going on here. Like the world as will and the world as representation are just they're two kind of sides of the very same thing. Now, again, it's very important to note that like Schopenhauer is not claiming that the world in itself has specific desires, in the way that I desire to drink of water, or that I might desire to be a millionaire or whatever. So we have to distinguish specific desires, specific acts of willing from the general will. When Schopenhauer talks about will, it's referring to a kind of general striving energy, or like whatever, like that in individual human beings manifests as specific desires. But will, as the thing in itself, will is not necessarily conscious. There's no rationality, no understanding, It doesn't engage in any kind of deliberation. These sorts of capacities only develop later, only in some creatures. Human beings, will manifests as being shaped by reasons and rationality, but actually will underlies everything in the universe. All of the actions of human beings, all of the principles of growth and development, the basic biological urge to reproduction, the fundamental physical forces of gravity and electromagnetism, all of these are manifestations of will. All of these are striving towards something. Think of how a plant strives for nutrients by growing its roots, or how an atom strives towards having a complete electron shell by capturing an electron from another atom. Will is not a conscious being. It doesn't have any particular purpose. It's this like underlying principle of reality. To exist is to have some end, to strive in some direction. Ultimately, nothing exists beyond will. So will in itself has no ultimate purpose. Again, purposes, goals, that only arises in particular creatures. There's nothing in particular that will is striving towards, and so there can be no final satisfaction of will. As Schopenhauer puts it, it always strives, because striving is its sole nature, to which no attained goal can put an end. Such striving is therefore incapable of final satisfaction. It can be checked only by hindrance, but in itself it goes on forever. A desire for something in particular is a mere expression of the will in the world as representation. Satisfying a desire can end some specific expression of will, but it cannot end will itself. And we can now see the heart of Schopenhauer's pessimism. Will, the thing in itself, is mindless, without rationality or knowledge, without form or figure, without purpose or meaning. Since pure will is not willing for anything in particular, it is utterly insatiable. The essence of all reality is an endless, restless striving for nothing in particular, a state of eternal frustration and craving that never progresses towards anything. So that's the picture. Human beings are merely manifestations of will. And ultimately, no matter how sophisticated we may think we are, we act only in the service of will, or we act only as will. And so, it's important to see that for Schopenhauer, it's not that, that like I kind of exist and have kind of goals and values that I work out through reason, and then I make particular acts of will. I just am will. In reality, there is, simply will, a single undivided unity that manifests in representation as a plurality of things, including me. So it's not that I have, this, I can like use reason and work out a conception of the good life, and then I will myself to attain the good life. No, I have goals and values because I am will. So the philosopher George Simmel once nicely summarized Schopenhauer's view as follows: I do not will by virtue of values and goals that are posited by reason, but I have goals because I continuously and ceaselessly will from the depths of my essence. So, with this in mind, Schopenhauer's central pessimistic argument can be stated as follows. Premise 1, the essence of existence is will. Premise 2, when a living being wills for something, it experiences a lack or deficiency. Premise 3, to experience a lack or deficiency is suffering. Premise 4, it is impossible to satisfy will. So, conclusion, to live is to suffer. Will is the source of suffering, and as the essence of everything, as the thing in itself, it is inescapable. So all life is suffering. Some lives are better than others, but no lives are good. Nobody can escape the suffering at the heart of existence. So let's consider in a bit more detail this connection between will and suffering. The idea is that suffering occurs when our desires are frustrated, when we are prevented from achieving particular goals. Of course, there are plenty of specific desires that I will be able to satisfy. I desire chocolate cake, so I go to the kitchen and get some chocolate cake. Yummy. Now, in this case, I'm satisfied and I experience pleasure. Or, maybe I desire a promotion at my job and then I'm awarded the promotion. Well, again, desire satisfied. So these specific desires are going to be manifestations of will, but the picture here doesn't look so negative. I mean, yes, there's going to be some frustration in a person's life. There are going to be some desires that go unsatisfied, but we might hope that by satisfying enough desires, our lives will be good overall. The problem with this, Schopenhauer argues, is that the moment any particular desire is satisfied, I simply start willing again. So once I've attained the object of my desire, its shine will very quickly wear off, and I will realize it doesn't bring me anywhere near as much happiness as I expected. And I think this is something we're probably all familiar with. So yeah, maybe I'll strive to get the promotion at work, but then as soon as I get that promotion, I set my sights on something else. Another promotion, a higher wage, a different job, or I might strive to buy a flashy new car, but as soon as I get the car, I find myself just wanting more material items, like a new TV or a bigger house. Actually, the car, yeah, once I've got the car, like, I don't really care so much. It just doesn't, it doesn't bring me the sort of lasting satisfaction I thought it would. Or maybe I strive to upload a philosophy video to YouTube. I spend hours and hours working on it in the expectation that it's going to bring me this feeling of intellectual satisfaction. But then as soon as the video is uploaded, as soon as it's done, I just move on to the next topic. As Schopenhauer puts it in a rather beautiful passage, the enchantment of distance shows us paradises that vanish like optical illusions when we have allowed ourselves to be fooled by them. Accordingly, happiness lies always in the future or else in the past, and the present may be compared to a small dark cloud driven by the wind over a sunny plain. In front of and behind the cloud, everything is bright, only it itself always casts a shadow. Consequently, the present is always inadequate, but the future is uncertain and the past irrecoverable. I expect that I will be happy in the future if only I could achieve particular goals. Like if only I could get the right house, the right relationship, the right job, if only I could accumulate the right items. But then once I achieve those goals, a new desire just pops up. New desires just pop up in their place. And then I'm again looking ahead to this distant paradise where those new desires are fulfilled. But there's never any lasting satisfaction. I mean, it's true that once a desire is satisfied, the striving to satisfy that particular desire disappears. But the expected pleasure of satisfying the desire disappears also. Indeed, it's often the case that satisfying your desires brings unexpected pains. So once you've acquired like the I don't know, the big TV. Well, now you're gonna fear losing it, right? Like you're gonna fear losing it, and you're probably also gonna become unable to appreciate the things you had before. So like where once upon a time you might have desired a smaller TV, right? Go back 10 years ago, the sorts of TVs they had 10 years ago. Once that was the object of your desire. That seemed really brilliant, but now you have this flashier, better TV. And the old one just rubbish, right? So it's just this endless, ceaseless pursuit of like just constantly running kind of faster and faster, pursuing bigger and bigger things, and never achieving any satisfaction. And this unfortunate situation is due to the nature of will. Usually we think, or at least, so a common sort of assumption here is, well, I kind of desire things because they're good for me in some sense. So the reason why I want to devote myself to philosophy is because I take it that philosophy is in itself a worthwhile endeavor. It's intellectually stimulating to understand the nature of the world, the scope and limits of knowledge, and so on. But in fact, on Schopenhauer's view, what makes the objects of my desire good to me is merely the fact that I crave them, that I desire them, and like it's that they become like objects of will, of this kind of that I have this craving towards these objects. That's what makes them good. And so once I get the objects, once the desire is satisfied, I'm no longer craving them, and so the object just loses its luster. I am will. My essence is will. And as we've seen, satisfying a particular expression of will, satisfying a particular desire, does nothing to satisfy will itself. Schopenhauer says, its desires are unlimited, its claims inexhaustible, and every satisfied desire gives birth to a new one. So satisfying a desire just sets the sights of will elsewhere. And so the general problem then is, we will be stuck forever in this condition of kind of craving, of dissatisfaction. As Schopenhauer says, all striving comes from lack, from a dissatisfaction with one's condition, and is thus suffering as long as it is not satisfied. But no satisfaction is lasting. Indeed, it is only the beginning of a new striving. We see striving everywhere, inhibited in many ways, struggling everywhere, and thus always suffering. There is no final goal of striving, and therefore no bounds or end to suffering. So Christopher Janaway, in his article on Schopenhauer's Pessimism, gives this useful diagram of our situation. So suppose, beginning with state A, let's suppose that I am striving towards some state X. I want to achieve X. Well, now there are two possibilities, right? Either I attain X or I don't. Now, if I fail to attain X, this is represented in state C, well, I'm obviously in a state of suffering. There's a conflict between the way I want the world to be and the way the world actually is. To strive for a goal and fail to attain it is to lack something. I'm going to feel a deficiency. Think of the feeling of unsatisfied thirst when you can't find water, or the longing for a romantic relationship even though you're alone, or desperately wanting to sleep when you have work to do. This is a negative state. Now, that's not to say that it's horrible, right? I mean, failing to achieve your goals isn't always going to be misery or agony, but it's a negative state, right? It's a state you don't want. It's frustration. So in Janaway's diagram, states A and C are straightforwardly negative. They are states of dissatisfaction, of frustration. Now, let's say I strive towards X and I don't achieve it. We're in state C. Well, now I could maybe just give up my goal. This is clearly possible. I might recognize that some desire is unrealistic and so abandon it. And then I'm going to land in state D, in the absence of striving. And if you think, okay, well, if there's the absence of striving, then surely there's going to be an absence of suffering. The problem with state D, according to Schopenhauer, is that it very quickly induces a state of boredom. Since it is in my nature to will, I actually can't occupy a state absent of striving for very long. I'm just going to find myself willing again. In fact, boredom is a kind of willing, right? Like when you are bored, you are sort of willing for new goals in a sense. So actually, so once you're in state D, that just very quickly becomes replaced with boredom, and then you're striving again. And this is also going to be the problem with state B. So if you strive towards X and you attain X, well, attaining a goal does temporarily satisfy the will in the sense that it satisfies a specific desire, but then there's going to be an absence of striving, and I'm soon enough going to be restless again, right? Like if I have everything I want, so I have nothing to strive for, I find myself in a state of boredom, and boredom, again, that's a kind of striving. I desire to be free from boredom, so I'm forced to adopt new goals. So state B soon gives way to either A or D, and then that just goes back to A again, to striving for something else. So ultimately, all paths just lead towards more and more striving. So yeah, here's the sort of summary, right? In the end, ultimately, we're kind of constantly pulled back to these negative states, these states of frustration. Any particular goal is really only an illusion, right? When I strive for some specific goal and achieve it, well, striving is just going to reappear under a new form, right? It's going to either manifest as boredom or as some new specific goal. And this is because what's really driving me is the ceaseless will, acquiring the things I want, removes their charm, because once I have them, they can no longer be a subject of striving. So then the will must strive for something else. Schopenhauer concludes, hence its life swings like a pendulum to and fro between pain and boredom, and these two are in fact its ultimate constituents. And that's that. This is, of course, a very bleak picture of the human condition, but there is a fairly obvious objection here, which is, even in this model that Schopenhauer has presented, surely there's still going to be satisfaction and happiness in state B. Now, yes, the satisfaction may only be brief and soon will give way to frustration or boredom, but in principle we might think, wouldn't it be possible though, so if enough of my goals are satisfied, and if I kind of regularly form new desires that are easily satisfied, I should be experiencing regular happiness, right? Like I achieve a goal, I experience satisfaction, and maybe that satisfaction could be great enough, could last long enough, or could happen often enough to outweigh the pains of life. That doesn't look quite so pessimistic. So basically the thought is, as long as I attain state B regularly enough, maybe I'll experience enough happiness to make life worth it. Well, this brings us to another important aspect of Schopenhauer's pessimism, which is his view that all satisfaction is ultimately negative. So satisfaction, Schopenhauer thinks, is not a positive state, but rather involves merely the removal of pain. When I am thirsty and I take a drink, I'm satisfied by the removal of the pain of thirst, but ultimately I'm gaining nothing beyond the deliverance from a state of suffering. The moment the water is swallowed, the thirst is quenched, the pleasure ceases. So, pain will last for as long as the unsatisfied desire lasts, and I look forward to a future state of happiness where the desire is satisfied. But then as soon as the desire is satisfied, there actually isn't any like positive happiness associated with it. I've just been delivered from that specific pain. Pain, pain, frustration, loneliness, fear, these all have a specific positive character. Well-being, on the other hand, it's just like the absence of these unpleasant feelings. So ultimately then, Schopenhauer says, nothing can ever be gained but deliverance from some suffering or desire. Consequently, we are only in the same position as we were before this suffering or desire appeared. There's a popular response to the problem of evil, the argument that God's existence is incompatible with the existence of evil in the world. There are some theist philosophers who argue that the way to solve this problem is to say that evil is not a positive thing, but is a privation, a mere absence of good. Schopenhauer is kind of just inverting this, right? On Schopenhauer's view, pleasure is merely the absence of pain. Goodness is merely the absence of evil. And that's it. So actually, fulfilling a desire doesn't put us in a positive state. It only offers a brief respite from suffering and boredom. So state B in the diagram can never outweigh the sufferings of A, C, and D. Even a person who spends the majority of their time in state B, like even if 99% of your life were in state B, which of course is far, far better than what any actual person has, even that wouldn't be a good life. Life is necessarily, all life is going to be suffering interrupted by brief periods where the suffering is absent. But even if the suffering in the world were, 1,000 times less than it is, 10,000 times less, the non-existence of the world would be preferable to its existence. In fact, given the view of happiness as a mere privation, it seems that, just one instance of minor suffering would be sufficient to condemn existence. Ultimately, the scales can never tip in favor of existence. It's always going to come out negative, because you're basically just moving between negative states and neutral states. Life is suffering interspersed by a few brief neutral moments where we're delivered from suffering, but very quickly new sufferings will arise. The suffering arises from this endless, restless striving of the will that manifests in all things. And moreover, there actually isn't really any way to put an end to this predicament. You might think, well, given this given this very dark picture of life, maybe we should be considering suicide, or at least antinatalism, right? Couldn't I get out of this by ending my life, or at least I could, refrain from bringing any new people into this. Well, actually, neither of those things is going to make any difference, really. Human beings, on Schopenhauer's view, are merely representation. Right? Our bodies and minds are mere appearances in the phenomenal world. So what I call my body, what I call my mind, that's mere representation. My essence is thing in itself, is will. And it should be obvious that to end one's own life, or to fail to create new life, that would do nothing to affect the thing in itself. The endless, blind, striving will. Nothing can affect the thing in itself, because the thing in itself it's just this undifferentiated kind of pure unity. It doesn't have parts, it doesn't change, it doesn't enter into causal relations. So if somebody was to commit suicide, that would be to assume that by ending a particular set of representations, they can end the will. But of course you can't do that. That's actually no different from mistakenly assuming that by satisfying some particular desires, you could satisfy will. You can't, doesn't work, right? The will is just always there, and always will be, right? Ultimately is no way to end it. So that's it. That's where we are, according to Schopenhauer. Okay, well, I think, so before we end, it might be worth just briefly turning to some of the objections to Schopenhauer's views. So I guess, one kind of general worry here is we might worry about Schopenhauer's broader metaphysics, right? This very idea of the world as will and representation. Obviously, there's a lot we could say about this. I'm not going to spend too long on this objection because I'm specifically concerned with his pessimism, but it's worth flagging up. In particular, there's a worry here that by identifying the thing in itself as will, surely this is just another representation. So Schopenhauer takes from Kant this distinction between the phenomenal world, the world as it appears in perception and thought, and the noumenal world, the thing in itself. Schopenhauer points out, well, since we're already part of the world, we have a direct acquaintance with the thing in itself. Like we are, like I am the thing in itself. Now, okay, well, fair enough. Let's grant that that's true. It doesn't follow from this that the thing in itself is knowable. Like, it doesn't follow from this that I will be able to come to believe true propositions about the thing in itself. I mean, maybe the thing in itself is just inexpressible in our language and thought. And, and a general worry here is that, by kind of introspecting on my own experience, by sort of, in fact, even by kind of classifying things as, like, on the one hand perception and on the other hand introspection, by talking about external knowledge and internal knowledge, and then by classifying what I find when I introspect, well, I'm now engaging in conceptualization, right? I'm representing the world in one way or another. So so to say that, like, thing in itself is will, well, it actually arguably looks like, well, no, that's just, when I say that thing in itself is will, surely that's just how thing in itself appears in a particular representation. But then that's just the case for all our representations, right? So we might worry that, that actually there just is going to be no way of coming to know the thing in itself. And that would, of course, undermine the whole metaphysical picture that Schopenhauer has. Okay then, some problems for Schopenhauer's specifically pessimistic claims. So a second worry here is that there are arguably plenty of cases where striving is experienced as a positive state. So recall states A and C on Janaway's diagram. Schopenhauer claims that striving involves frustration, a sense of lacking something that is desired. But we might think, well, that doesn't always square with how we experience goal-directed behaviour. Recall the classic phrase, the chase is better than the catch, right? As you progress towards attaining a goal, you often experience pleasure, not pain. There may well be a genuine sense of achievement, of things getting better. So if I desire to earn enough money to buy a new house, and I find that I am indeed accumulating wealth, so that the house is within my grasp, I'm going to feel good about this. And it's not just that I expect that I will feel good about this in the future, it's that I feel good about it right now as I'm like working towards the attainment of the goal. Now, of course, if the goal is too difficult to achieve, if you don't know how to achieve it, or you have little hope of success, then yeah, there's going to be pain, probably. But there's a difference between striving for a goal and progressing towards it, and striving to a goal while failing to achieve it, and arguably, it's usually only the latter that creates frustration. Indeed, as Janaway points out, very often people will actually prolong their struggle towards a goal. So think of a mountaineer who aims to summit the 14 8,000ers. If they were given the option of being lifted to the summit without any effort on their part, they'd probably refuse, because the pleasure of summiting a mountain, it is precisely in the striving, it's precisely in the struggle, not so much in the achievement of the goal. Now, of course, Schopenhauer could claim that what's going on in these cases is we're just choosing a state of frustration over boredom, right? Like we set goals for ourselves and we prolong our struggles in order to avoid boredom. But, I mean, I don't know if that squares with the phenomenology in many cases, right? I mean, presumably the people who do mountaineering will feel like they are gaining some sort of positive value from their activities. And this brings us to a third objection, which is it does seem quite implausible to say that satisfaction is merely a negative state, merely the absence of suffering. I mean, for one thing, there are going to be various different qualities associated with what we would normally think of as positive experiences. So think about, listening to music, eating dinner with your partner, sex, exercise, taking a warm bath, engaging in a fulfilling conversation about philosophy. Well, one issue with the negativity thesis is that there are very specific properties associated with these things. So compare, listening to music with taking a warm bath. It doesn't seem that what we feel in these cases is mere alleviation of suffering, right? Like I can describe the specific auditory qualities of the music, the emotions and thoughts that it prompts, the way it relates to other types of artwork, and then I can compare this, right? Compare this to the feeling of warm water on one's skin, and then again, like what sort of emotions are associated with that, and so on. So, what's good about the music is different from what's good about the bath, and so what's good about them can't merely be the absence of suffering, because what's good about them is different. So it can't be the same thing in both cases. And then you might compare all of these experiences to deep sleep. Deep sleep ends suffering, but deep sleep seems like a genuinely kind of neutral state, right? There's no particular feelings associated with it. Again, that's quite different from music or taking a warm bath. Now, of course, it may well be that these satisfactions can be felt only relative to some prior suffering. I mean, maybe the only reason why I experience the warm bath as positive is because of some prior negative states. It may also be that these satisfactions soon fade away and I suffer again. I mean, certainly the time that I will enjoy spending a warm bath is quite limited. But, I mean, none of that shows that satisfaction is mere absence of suffering. So, yeah, we might think that maybe Schopenhauer states his case a bit too strongly, but even so, it's an interesting view, I think, and that is the end of that video. So, thank you for watching. Goodbye, everybody.